I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. Continuing with our theme of calf rearing facilities, on this week's episode I spoke to dairy advisor Trevor Dunwoody about the alternative options to the traditional calf shed.
The majority of clients that I would deal with would still have some form of, the traditional calf shed, whether it's purpose built or maybe in some cases it's older sheds which have been converted to house calves. I suppose the one thing that I would note on those types of houses, you need to be very careful that those sheds don't become overstocked. Obviously that would increase the risk of disease. You need adequate floor space and ventilation. In terms of alternatives then, I suppose the couple of main alternatives that I would see among my clients, firstly would be calf hutches. So look at a couple of farmers have individual hutches, but more commonly it would be group hutches that would hold somewhere between 3 and 8 calves. Generally, they would be located on an outdoor concrete area, maybe an old silage slab or something like that, where the runoff can be collected and stored. Very important that the runoff from those hutches would be collected and stored. I suppose the one big or the couple of big positives for the calf hutches, number one, they can be moved if they become in the way of any future development on the farm. And look at if they're no longer required, if there's some alternative housing constructed, then they can be sold on. Look at the calf hutches, very useful. The calf has the best of both worlds. They have shelter with the hutches, and generally there's a penned area at the front where they've access to fresh air and so on. So that's one alternative. Second one then, would be outdoor rearing. A number of my clients would let calves out from maybe 3 to 4 weeks of age in groups, like maybe up to 30 or 40 calves per group. They'd put them to a sheltered paddock, or generally as sheltered as they would have. And look at some artificial shelter may have to be added if it's necessary, depending on the weather and the location. Generally, they would try and keep them close to the yard if they needed to be rehoused in the case of extremely bad weather. And they would be fed with a mobile feeder, usually behind a quad or a small tractor. And meal would be kept available to those calves at all times. So that's a couple of the alternatives. A number of farmers then, that would be contract rearing the calves then would move the calves off the farm fairly early, maybe onto the contract rearers farm, who would have accommodation available. Not all of the contract rearers might have calf accommodation, but in some cases they may have, and that would obviously reduce the space requirement and labour requirement on the dairy farmer's own individual farm.
So just to pick up on a few things, I suppose firstly the calf hutch option, Trevor, like say you were saying that might be on say an old silage pit, or often we see that people have multiple silage pits on farms, and they'd technically there is an empty silage pit available for calf hutches in that scenario.
Yeah, and look at in terms of where housing is short. In many cases, there are multiple silage pits. I suppose the calf hutches maybe would work best in an uncovered pit, Emma. Where there's plenty of ventilation and there'd be no issue. They would also work in covered silos, but generally, if you have an uncovered silage slab, it'd be an ideal spot to locate a number of hutches. Which would get you over maybe a shortage of space as well.
And then looking to the outdoor rearing. So you mentioned that some farmers are getting calves out from 3-4 weeks of age, and like we do see research has shown it and farmers have shown it that it is an option. Now obviously where the weather turns poor, like in the instance of say 2018, you need to look at alternatives there, but that is a real option on farms. And
it is a real option, but I suppose looking in the worst case scenario, you probably do need to have a plan B in place. Some sort of a facility that you can, maybe get them back in for a few days. If you have heavy snow or really, really bad weather, they may need to come back in. But certainly it's a real option on many farms. And look at it, certainly significantly reduces labor. And if the weather is, we call it normal, then certainly the health of the calves would certainly improve. And yeah, it's definitely a real option on many farms, Emma. Yes.
And as you say, in it's a labour reliever at a busy time of year.
Yeah, look at sure that time of the year always tends to be the crunch time on dairy farms. So, anything to get, calves, you can get the calves out of the yard into large groups, reduce the time requirement. Certainly it's going to be a huge benefit on a dairy farm at that time of the year, going into maybe early March or thereabouts, you're really hitting the crunch time.
Yeah, and as you say, in terms of when they're out at that crunch time in early March, that also is the peak where there would, your largest number will be on farm in terms of calf numbers. Then in terms of the contract rearing, how early do you see calves going off farm to be contract reared, Trevor?
Yeah, well, probably the earliest that I would see among my clients would be 10 to 14 days. Look at the calves would get their, they'd be calved on the dairy farm. They would get their colostrum, and they would get off to a good start. And be in a good healthy position going off to the contract rearer. Now, obviously, not all agreements are that. Like in some cases, the calves are fully reared on the dairy farm, but in some cases where the contract rearer has a calf accommodation, some or all of those calves would head off to the contract rearer at a much earlier stage. In some cases, it may be a retired dairy farmer who has got into contract rearing, and he may have some accommodation available, which can certainly reduce the requirement on the main dairy farmers on his housing requirements.
And look, when we talk about the contract rearer, that's typically the female replacements. But do you see many of your clients who have a strong relationship with, say, a dry stock farmer, and they're able to sell their male calves off the farm at that early stage of 2 weeks of age or so?
Yeah. So yeah, look at I have a couple of clients who have agreements made, and I suppose one sticks in my mind. Yeah, all his non-replacement calves go to a local beef farmer. Look, at this has been ongoing for, I think this is the fourth year now of the agreement. So in this case, the price is agreed between the dairy farmer and the beef farmer prior to the calving season. So there's no haggling over price. All the calves are treated the same. So the dairy farmer, proper colostrum management, and he ensures that the calves are as healthy as he can have them. The beef farmer, then, he collects the calves twice a week, Monday and Thursday. And they're gone off the dairy farmer from 10, 12, 14 days of age. The beef farmer takes them on at that stage. They're in a good position to move on. They're healthy. They've got their colostrum. And look at it. It seems to be a win-win for all parties. As I said, it's been going on 4 years now. So obviously, if either party wasn't happy with the agreement, it wouldn't be going on at this stage. So yeah, and look at a massive relief of to get the calves away off the farm. It's all agreed in advance. There's no haggling, no hassle. Everybody's under pressure at that time of the year. Calves move off twice a week, and there's no pressure on space. So that's a great option where a farmer is limited in terms of the space that he has. Just really has enough space now for the replacement calves that he'll be holding on to. He has expanded a little bit in recent years, so it's ideal to get any of those non-replacement calves off the farm as early as possible.
And I think, look, it's an important point that you make, Trevor, about the price. And, the price is set. We often see the situation where we might have a strong calf, might be 4 or 5 kilos heavier than the norm. And you'd say, God, there's definitely 10 or 20 euro more in that calf. But realistically, you're doing well on average.
Yeah, it tends to balance out. Look, it's an average. Obviously there's a different price maybe for, dairy bull calves versus beef calves. There's 2 or 3 different prices agreed for the different types of calves, and irregardless, after that, that's the price that is paid. So yeah, look at one with another, it tends to balance out, Emma. over the season.
And then finally, Trevor, one of the obvious options is to upgrade, like modify existing sheds, to cater for additional calves on farm, or build a new calf shed. Like, do you see many examples of that among your
Yeah,
clients?
so look, I suppose two different examples there. One was, where a farmer had a number of covered silos, and look at he converts one of those each year. So his second or third cut silage goes into the pit. It's used up generally by early January, spring calving farm. He then, during the month of January, he sets up temporary pens in that covered silo. So in this particular case, the silo that I'm aware of, it's 45 by 30 foot. So he sets up six group pens. It'll hold 48 calves, 8 per pen. And then look at the end of the calf rearing season, the gates can be removed easily for cleaning, and they're stored then for use the following year again. I've also seen a farmer where he has, used straw bales for the dividing pens. So look at either of those are good options. It can be gates, can be straw. But the critical thing is that he's using an existing set. So basically, the shed has two uses. So during the summer and autumn, it's used as a silo, and in the spring, it's a calf shed. So it's good use of existing sheds. Look at the other alternative then is the brand new calf shed, Emma. I have a number of clients who have built new calf sheds in the last couple of years. Look at mostly they would have been using, older sheds, which had been converted to calf housing. And in many cases, there was a lot of individual pens, a lot of manual cleaning, extra labor required in those sheds. So following a visit by myself, and following some discussion, it was decided probably the best scenario was to build a new purpose-built calf shed. We selected site, designed the shed. So look at one example. It was a 5-bay shed, 8 group pens. There's a feed storage area and a prep area, with then some individual pens incorporated into one area of the shed. Look at generally a new calf shed will be an excellent investment. You'd expect, with very limited additional spend, you probably expect to get 25, 30 years lifespan out of it. In the few cases that I had, they were all eligible for the TAMS grant. So look at that certainly reduces the cost significantly for the shed. So look at excellent investment in all cases. I've been speaking to all those farmers since, and look at certainly it has helped in terms of labour and calf management at a particularly busy time of the year.
And I think, look, I mean, you've made very valid points, Trevor, in terms of, as an area to invest in, it's very cost effective. Some people people will be eligible for the TAMS grant, and you're going to get 40 to 60% of the money back on that. And I don't think we can underestimate the effect of a good or bad calf housing arrangement on farms. Like, we would have spoken with Emer Kennedy in the past on the podcast, and she would have emphasised how important it is, and the effect of ill health due to poor ventilation on farms. And we must emphasise that a lot of these calves that we are rearing within our calf housing, it is the future of our herd, and where it's done right, we will be very profitable, but where it's done wrong, we might have very mediocre stock entering the dairy herd.
Yeah. Look at the difference between a well-designed calf shed and poorly designed. There's a huge return on investment in that. Like as you said there, to have healthy calves, that move on, they're the future of the herd, and it's absolutely critical that they're looked after in those first 3 to 4 months of their life. Like that's absolutely critical, that they get off to a good start, and that they're able to to move on from that stage.
Super. Thanks a million, Trevor.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Trevor Dunwoody for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.